Good evening. My name is Natalie Wang, and I'm coming into my senior year at Lincoln High School in Portland, Oregon. I was first introduced to WorldOregon's Young Leaders in Action program through my school's Constitution team, and got involved because I wanted to connect with other people beyond my own school and fight for issues that I care deeply about. Through YLA, I was inspired to start a program called Youth Advocates for Immigrants and Refugees to elevate the voices of immigrants and refugees in Portland. We have a particular focus on youth and to celebrate each other's cultures. A couple weeks ago, we hosted an event where we had community murals, community dances, story exchanges, and Syrian food as part of a county cultural grant that we received earlier this year. We've also recently launched a podcast exploring individuals' experiences, which has truly allowed me to engage at a deeper level with people's stories of immigrating to the US. The podcast for me is such a testament towards how beautiful a multicultural and diverse America can truly be. And the mantra we hear so often is that Gen Zers will do worse than their parents in basically every way imaginable. And I think that part of the reason why we see giant student movements like March for Our Lives and the youth-led climate protests this spring was because we're just tired of hearing that. I'm standing here tonight and I'm proud to say and I'm so proud to say that in the face of constantly being told that we have to be older to affect change and politics are being prioritized above the next generation, that we're standing up to take initiative for our own future. And I think that it's incredibly special that we get to ride and help shape the wave of hope and activism that is coming. And maybe we are young and impressionable, but as long as we keep pushing the conversations and speaking out against injustice, I believe that we do have the power to move national agendas, local agendas, even state agendas. One thing that really inspires me about Erica Fernandez is that she didn't allow the barriers in front of her to come in the way of her activism. The fact that she pursued her ideals fearlessly, and despite the racial, gender, and age barriers, brings me hope that fighting for justice can still be possible. When she was 16, my age, she spoke up against a natural gas pipeline that was slated to be constructed that ran through low-income neighborhoods and actually affected real-world change. Since then, she's gone on to become a fierce champion for the environment. In a world where so much inequity exists, it's so inspiring to see young women like Erica taking the baton and continuing to make inroads for environmental justice. I hope that WorldOregon audiences today will take away the fact that activists like Erica can give us hope about the future. It's easy, especially with social media and cable TV, to become deeply discouraged about everything that is happening today. And while there's still a lot of work to be done, Erica can give us hope that change can and will come, as long as we listen to each other and be thoughtful about our activism. I hope that WorldOregon audiences today can recognize the impact that youth will have in shaping our future. I think that Erica and her work show that youth-led and youth-initiated activism is key to not only shaping conversations in the present, but also creating real-world change in the future. And so with that, please join me in welcoming Erica Fernandez. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here standing in front of all of you today. It is great to share the space with people that believe that we can achieve a just and better world. As you know, today I'll be sharing my story as an immigrant and an activist fighting for environmental justice. And with every story, there's always a beginning. So my beginning starts in a small, humble town in Michoacán, Mexico. For those of you who are not familiar with Mexico, it's just in the middle. It's of the country. And it was a very small town, very humble. And I go back to share my story because I feel that my activism and my love for the earth actually started in those 10 years that I spent in that small town. And what do I mean by that? I live in a very humble town, which meant there were finite resources. I grew up, I'm one of 6 children. I'm the 5th one. My mother and my father never went to school. And in my community, being born a woman was the worst thing that could happen, basically. There were very low expectations. My grandfather told my mother, I'm not going to invest in you because you're going to be the product of someone else. And unfortunately, that was the same upbringing that my father believed too. Ironically, after my first brother, we were all female. But, he didn't get it then. And I share that too because since I was born, I was destined to fight obstacle after obstacle. But it was actually growing up with humble beginnings that really made me think about how we needed to take care of resources. For most of my childhood, we lived in an adobe house. Now, that's the environmental thing to do. And I grew up there, not having a flushing toilet, actually a hole in the ground, and maybe that wasn't the most environmental, but it was the way to live there. And we made sure everything kept clean. We'd use the sunlight to dry our clothes because there were no laundry machines. So it always makes me think, and I go back because I was more environmentalist then than now. For drinking water, or just having water in general, we needed to make sure when we opened the tap, we gather as much water as we could because we only have a 2-hour gap. And we needed to use the water to cook, to wash, to take showers. And so those 10 years of my life, spending around, working in the fields along my parents, taught me the best relationship I could have with the earth. That if I wanted to survive, I needed to take care of it. We grow our own food, but we also work in the fields picking strawberries so that others could eat. We didn't kill our animals because the chickens would give us eggs and the goats would give us milk. We couldn't afford having a cow. Again, even though those 10 years were tough, they taught me my first lessons of activism, or what we call now environmentalism. We didn't call it that then. We reuse, and we use until there was nothing to use of clothes and many other containers or many other things. But my life changed when we came to the United States. My father had started migrating to the United States very young with the Bracero program. He was one of the last young people who came to the United States to help while soldiers were going out to fight. He would come to the United States with the idea of coming and helping the family. However, we were 6 children, so that still meant that I had to work in the fields to sustain. And even though my mother doesn't know how to read or write, she still believed that obtaining an education was the best thing to do. So even though I was working in the fields in the morning, I would go to school in the afternoon. After 10 years, half of my family was able to come to the United States and reunite with my father. Unfortunately, at the tender age of 8, I wasn't able. And my younger sister, 4 years old, and the other sister that was only 13 too. So since very young, I was impacted by the politics that were happening in this side of the world. My family was separated by the immigration system. And what we call the right way, it takes a long time. It does separate families. And the only thing that my family wanted to do is to find a better life. Because there were not enough resources. Fortunately, a year after, when I was 10 years old, the whole family migrated to Oxnard, California. And I'm sure you're familiar with Oxnard, but for those of you who are not, it's a beautiful city. It's an agricultural and coastal town in between Santa Barbara and Malibu. Does that ring a bell? So my parents were farm workers. And like I mentioned, they were not able to obtain an education. So the only thing they could do coming to this country was to continue working in the fields. However, I could no longer work in the fields. It was illegal for a 10-year-old to work in the fields. So at a very young age, I understood that doing well in school meant helping my parents. And I did well in school not because I thought I was gonna end up in a place like Stanford University, but because it was my way to help my farm worker parents. I didn't want to get in trouble because I knew that that was a day my parents were gonna miss from working in the fields and that they couldn't afford it because we were barely getting by. We came to this country not knowing the language, not understanding the educational system. However, we had desire, or what we call in Spanish, the ganas. Las ganas to continue, the desire to have a better life. We sacrificed the little we had in Mexico for a better life here. And I wanted to make sure that I took advantage of my parents' sacrifice by doing well. At 12 years old, I had the opportunity to go to a beach cleanup. Back in Mexico, there was a lagoon behind my house. There were dirt roads, not a lot of cars, so you could imagine it was shock for me to move to Oxnard. And even though it's not in Los Angeles or San Francisco, it was much bigger than my little town. And so the beach was my place of recreation. My family could not afford taking us shopping or taking us to expensive places. But the beach was there. But the beach was also dirty. There was trash. And at 12 years old, I volunteered in a beach cleanup. Not knowing the language, I went. I wanted for the beach to look great, just like my little town. But I didn't know there was a way to pick the trash on a beach cleanup. There was things that you recycle, things that there was waste, and things that could be harmful. So I was very lucky to find a couple, Bill and Gloria. Like I mentioned, I did not know the language, but Gloria happens to be bilingual, and she spoke Spanish. So Gloria took me under her wing and decided to teach me how to clean the beach and how to pick trash. But not only that, she started telling me about the issues that were impacting the community of Oxnard. Among those issues, the power plant that you could see while cleaning the beach. Later, I find out that the pile of dirt was not a pretty mountain, but actually a Superfund site, where the dirt was blowing over the last natural wetlands, contaminating the oceans, and getting people sick. It was not ironic that I developed asthma at the age of 12. And it was not an accident that people were developing cancer or having respiratory problems or having children with abnormalities. But then again, that site did not have any signage. But also, as I continue learning, a lot of things didn't make sense. I was just a 12-year-old. But she mentioned of this project, of a liquefied natural gas facility. Believe me, it didn't click. But she did something really important. One of the things I did not mention, I grew up in a very conservative and very reserved family where girls didn't really have a voice. And in my home, that was not the exception. So you couldn't get involved. And if you got involved in that community, that meant you were probably sacrificing something at home. But Gloria did something. She believed in me. She believed that I could make the difference. And she invited me to her community meetings that she had in the center of a mobile home park with women. And I didn't know that making collages or learning how to decorate cakes or learning how to dance salsa was a new way of teaching me how to organize. And you would think, what does that mean? For young women, or especially for Mexican women, learning how to express yourself and finding your voice is not as easy. So she was teaching us how to find different ways to express ourselves. And once she got that down, then she started telling us about the technical things, about the projects and the issues that were happening in our community. And it was then when she started educating me, informing me about the project. I can tell you that the technical stuff didn't really click. But what did click was when she said, this corporation is trying to bring this liquefied natural facility 40 miles off the coast of Oxnard, which was the south part of Oxnard, which is the part that is surrounded by agricultural fields that are still being sprayed by pesticides, where most of my family members and friends and the parents of my friends work. Like I said, it was not an accident that the power plant, that the Superfund site, that the fields were in the southern part of Oxnard. I knew that something wasn't right. I knew that we didn't deserve to be breathing contaminants. And I knew that my parents and the people that were hardly working in the fields did not deserve to have another project going through the places of work, even though the company said that it was going to create more jobs. Because let me tell you, those jobs were not going to be for the people that look like me, but that look like my parents. So the word on the streets that there was no way we could stop the richest mining corporation. But I figure, why don't we try, right? We couldn't lose anything by trying. But if we let it happen, we could lose a lot. And so when I felt that I knew what the project was, or at least the basics, and really understood how it was going to impact my community, I started door knocking. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Instagram. We actually had to go door by door. And because I spoke Spanish, I started with the community that was going to be the most impacted, which was my community, my neighbors, the children that went to school with me, the children that run to the beach or play in the beach. For every door I knocked, for those that opened, there were like 10 that closed it and didn't want to know anything. And I don't blame my community members because there's no trust. Either someone is selling you something or someone maybe wanting something else. So it was hard, starting those first years of organizing. But we never gave up. It was at the beginning a very small group. It was Gloria and Bill and a couple attorneys and Sierra Club members. And little by little, we were starting to make a difference. We would ask for every person that opened the door, we asked them, can you open your house and for your neighbors to come and learn? And not only that, we also protested in front of their offices in Oxnard. I remember I would take a hula hoop because that was the size of the pipeline that was going to go through my neighborhood. And little by little, I also realized that our community was experiencing environmental racism. That term really didn't sound well for some of our community members. But how can you explain that this company proposed the project to the richer communities, Camarillo, Ventura, and they immediately protested But the company had the money to add 10 more miles to the project and go around and only impact Oxnard. You know that something wasn't right. So when we understood the motives of this company, that they were putting money on above our community and also our environment, right? Because some of the impacts of this project was going to be that it was going to pollute over 280 tons of pollutants annually, in addition to the whole process of bringing it to Oxnard, having a floating tank, basically, three times the size of a football field, and in addition, pipelines going through the agricultural fields, schools, houses. Yeah, they call it a more friendly, environmental friendly energy. But what does it mean for the people displaced, for the jobs lost? What do you call that? But they didn't talk about that. And they knew exactly that they couldn't. But they continued to target that community because they thought that they were not going to miss a day of work, similar to my parents, because they needed to survive. And they knew that they were not going to protest the same way that the community of Camarillo and Ventura did. But they were wrong. But we didn't know that then, right? We couldn't tell them. We couldn't stop it. We just had to keep going and hoping that at least we delayed the project. It took many door knocks. It took many presentations on the churches. It took many radio interviews. It took many TV shows. It took many stickers trying to advocate. It took many meetings. But we continue. We believe that we can deserve better and that we were going to at least make our voices heard. So after meeting with stakeholders and realizing that the political and the commissioners were leaning towards the project, we definitely knew we needed to do better. And we continue. We created a coalition and an organization known as COST, the Central Coast Alliance United for Sustainable Economy, started organizing. They brought up organizers and started really creating a coalition to stop this corporation. It was through them that I got more formal, or what you would call formal organizing trainings. And it was after 4 years of that we finally had the opportunity to make our voices heard, to show that all that long-term organizing was worth it. It was April 9, 2007. I still remember that day as if it was yesterday because I was still knocking doors in the morning before the hearing. It was April 9, 2007 when the future of my community was at stake. All the work that I was doing involuntarily. I wasn't getting paid. I was doing it because I truly believe that it was the right thing to fight. Because that's a lesson that my mom taught me, even though she never went to school. She showed me lessons that you don't learn in the best universities like Stanford. She taught me the value of perseverance, and that if you fail, you get up and you continue. So giving up was not an option. So until that day, I wanted to show that all the work, all those 4 years, knocking doors, having meetings, passing a hat for accepting donations so that we can have flyers, so that we can have pins, so that we can have the hula hoops to show that 36-inch pipeline, that it was going to come to our communities. It was that day where we needed to bring that community together. And it was that day that we brought people from all ages, from all ethnicities, rich, poor, all united for one reason: at least to stop this corporation. We didn't know what their motive was. We didn't know if it was the environment, or if it was their jobs, or if it was gonna be the house, or their children's health, or their own health. We were all there for the same reason. We did not want this project. So there were over 2,000 people outside the rally, and around 1,000 people inside. I was chosen by cause as the youth leader to testify in front of the commission. So I was inside. But outside you can see a sea of blue t-shirts that said no LNG. But you also saw a couple of red shirts. And those red shirts were my high school peers that I organized, over 200 of them, to be the securities of the event. We want to make sure that everyone was safe. We wanted to make sure that everyone was following the rules, because we wanted to make sure that we would follow the political process to show that if we work together, we can make changes together. I couldn't see them outside, but I could hear them. And I was waiting patiently for my turn to speak. I was nervous. I had only been in the country for a few years. But I was gonna speak in front of the commissioners. That was a test not only of my organizing, but it was a test of my own upbringing. Before, I wasn't supposed to challenge or go against or criticize, right? That's how I grew up. But this time I had the opportunity to finally speak up. Not only to speak about myself or about my father, who at that point was ill and was using a respiratory tank at night to breathe, or because I had asthma. I was up there because I wanted my community to have a safe place and a safe environment. I spoke. You're not supposed to cheer or clap in these formal hearings, but that happened. And it was that moment when it clicked that what I was doing, it was making a difference. But it wasn't just for myself. I had the community behind me. I had that community outside. They were the proof that all the work we did was worth the effort. One of the commissioners actually made a comment. He said, when I was your age, I was playing video games. That night, it was the first unexpected victory. We won 2-1, even though someone told us that we were gonna lose. But that wasn't it. It was the State Lands Commission that voted against this project, not leasing the permits to the company, but there were still other commissions that needed to vote. So a few days later, we tried to do the same thing again. However, we couldn't take 3,000 people to Santa Barbara, where it was cold. But we did take as many as we could, and I was there. I spoke again. And now we had 12 commissioners that had in their hands the future of my community. And I decided to go because I thought, this is all I can do. Voice my concerns. The work has been done. We're already educated, inform our community, we already outreached them, we already mobilized them to take action, and they did what they needed to do, show up. And after those hours of hearings, they voted unanimously in favor of the people and against the project. That was, thank you. That was our second victory, unexpected victory, but we still had the governor to make, either to veto the project or to approve it. And back then, it was her friend Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was not quite the environmentalist. And that company happened to be from Australia. So there was the word on the street that he was going to approve the project. And actually, one of the posters and visuals that we had when we would protest in the office, it was a hula hoop with the poster said no LNG, and 2 sticks actually out of cowboy boots, because the company had given them a pair of cowboy boots. So for us, we felt that he was exchanging, and it was our way to highlighting, right, where he was standing around in environmental issues. I think he has become better nowadays, but we really didn't expect him to support us, but we did send hundreds of postcards and hundreds of phone calls, and he finally vetoed the project. But not only that, we also, as we followed the democratic process, we actually had a legislator that passed some legislation that would prohibit corporations like that to propose projects of the magnitude in places like Oxnard. So I share that story because everything that I have done since then, I have followed the same process. Some of the process and the campaigns that I have worked on have been successful. Others, we put on a fight. But some of the things that I did then, I continue to do them now. And it's so ironic that over a decade, we still haven't learned. And we continue to propose projects across the country similar to the liquefied natural gas facility. We continue to advocate for things that are actually not protecting the environment, or we say one thing here and we do another thing here. In order for us to make changes, we need to make radical and bold decisions. And some of the people in power are not willing to do that. And so since then, after going to Stanford and working for the federal government, state government, and working for unions, organizing people around different issues, around environmental justice or social justice, I'm back to organizing. Because if it's not me, who's gonna do it? When I was in Oxnard, at age 15, while fighting this multi-billion-dollar gas corporation, my family needed to move. My farm worker parents couldn't no longer afford Oxnard. So at age 15, I made the best decision of my life, even though it was the toughest decision. I left my parents and stayed behind in Oxnard. So while I was trying to do well in school and get myself ready to apply for colleges, I was still fighting for my community. It was tough, coming from a family that you don't leave the house until you're married, to live it, to accomplish what I thought it was impossible. But I couldn't let that stop me. Life was difficult, but I would have not done it if Gloria and Bill had not believed in me. So for all of you, youth and adults that are interacting with you, it does take you to believe in someone, for that person to feel empowered and find the voice that many times they were told that they didn't have. And it was through community organizing that I found my voice, the voice that my father and my society told me I didn't have because I was born a female, because I was an immigrant, because I was short, or I could go on the list of why I couldn't do things. And I keep sharing this story because everyone has a role to play. Not everyone needs to be in front of the hearing speaking. There are roles for everyone. And the important thing is that don't wait for your neighbor to do what you need to do. Because our actions or our lack of action has direct and indirect impact on those around you, not only in your communities, but around the world. During my time at Stanford, I could not organize, but I continued to share the story of Oxnard. And recently, Oxnard did it again without me. I did participate in a few campaigns or hearings, but I wasn't as involved as the first one. They stopped another gas plant. And that's the beauty of organizing, because when you organize, when you inform people, when you educate them, you can live and they'll get it done. While at Stanford, I worked and I did my thesis in communities in Mexico, looking at the impacts of globalization, urbanization, climate change, and biodiversity, and the transmission of traditional ecological knowledge. We did recycling, we did composting, we did as many things as we can do to an impacted area because of climate change. They have longer seasons where they don't get water, they deforested, and you can start seeing the impacts where water is more expensive than Coca-Cola. In the last years, I have also organized against the placing of industrial park in a community outside of Fresno County, where there was a cluster of cancer, where people had already died of cancer or were fighting cancer. Currently, I work as director of organizing a community water center. I am back in the valley. After 13 years away from my parents, I'm back to the valley. It wasn't my hometown, but that doesn't mean I don't fight for them. My parents have been some of the impacted residents that haven't had clean water or drinking clean water for over a decade. My parents, and I'm also impacted resident that lives and that has a private well with contaminated water, nitrates, and bacteria. But I'm not alone. There are over 1 million Californians that don't have access to safe and affordable drinking water. How ironic that California is the 5th largest economy in the world, and there's over 1 million Californians that don't have access to safe and affordable drinking water. That's what I'm doing now in the Valley. I'm fighting for all Californians who don't have access to clean water. Thank you. We're not dealing with power plants. We're not dealing with liquefied natural gas facilities. We're dealing what it's supposed to feed the world. Agribusiness that continue do the same business and thinking that there's no impacts. Climate change will make everything worse, including access to water supply. In the last drought, California, there were some communities that ran out of water. In California, the organization Community Water Center helped connect some of those communities with systems that still had water. However, how much longer can we go with not taking care of our planet? They're finite resources. So going back to my story of Mexico, now I cannot brush my teeth with water that is coming out of my tap. But I'm not the only one. My parents and all the residents that I work in the Central Valley, and it's not just an issue of the Central Valley, even though we're surrounded by agriculture, dairies, and leaky septic tanks. It's an issue that is impacting all Californians. So currently I'm focusing on water, but I continue to advocate for us to do better, not just around water issues. Because sooner or later, if it's not the contaminated air, if it's not the contaminated water, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, the climate crisis will not discriminate. But with that, that's when our role becomes really important. It is when each individual's actions could have an impact in how we live our lives. Community Water Center's vision is that all Californians should have access to safe and clean drinking water. But today my ask is that everyone should have access to safe, clean water. And for some places, they don't even have water anymore. We're so fortunate that we have a democratic system that allows for people coming together and fighting. But it's tough. It's tough to change a mindset where the more we have, the more we want. It is tough to organize people around issues that are not necessarily are impacting them directly. But that's when I ask for your support. If you currently have clean water, if you currently are breathing fresh air, because believe me, as someone who suffers from asthma, I don't have the privilege in the Central Valley. It has one of the worst air quality in the United States. Everyone says, why don't you leave? I don't leave because the communities that are there, what are they gonna do? I live there to fight. Because again, if it's not me, then who's gonna be? I called you today to take the steps needed to whatever you can do to make a difference in our quest to save the only planet we have, our only home. Help me make a difference either in your community out of time, state out of time, or whatever your level of engagement could be. Because what I have learned from community organizing across the countries that I've done it, which is Mexico and here, and across the states, is that a united community is more important than money. And with that, I would like to finish with the words of my role model, Cesar Chavez, who inspires me every day to make a difference. Once social change begins, it cannot be reversed. You cannot uneducate the person who has learned to read. You cannot humiliate the person who feels pride. And you cannot oppress the people who are not afraid anymore. We are the future, and the future is ours. And like Dolores Huerta says, sí se puede. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that very inspiring talk. It's a real treat to have you here. We're going to dive into some questions from the audience here, and just to follow up on that last point you made about Dolores Huerta, can you talk a little bit more about her and her impact not only on other leaders, but how you got to connect with her?
Well, you never know when you're going to get to work with your role model if you keep fighting, right? So it's been an honor for me to work alongside one of my heroes, I called her, Dolores Huerta. When I came to the United States through the migrant program, because my parents were farm workers, they taught us about Cesar Chavez, about Martin Luther King, about Dolores Huerta. And I never thought that I would get to walk and actually introduce her or present her in the press conference around drinking water issues. But even though I get to do that currently, it is so sad that after she's been fighting for over 50 years, we continue to fight for those kind of issues. She's almost 90 years old, and she's still knocking on doors because she truly believes that she could make a difference. And so I'm very grateful that now I get to work with her very closely to ensure that all Californians have access to safe and clean water. Thank you.
So I understand that one of your other mentors is Jane Goodall, and could you talk a little about how that relationship came about and the whole idea of encouraging more transgenerational social action?
Well, fighting for my community, that's what brought Jane Goodall to my community. Actually, I was very honored that during the fight, we had celebrities that joined us. and among them was Pierce Brosnan, also known as James Bond, in the fight, because the Malibu view was going to be impacted by the floating. No, I'm sure that there were more than that. He's an environmentalist, and he was really an important, he played an important role. And one of those roles is actually that he is connected with Dr. Jane Goodall, and he actually made it happen for her to come to my high school and to speak to my fellow students, and for me to give her a tour of the issues that were impacting Oxnard. So I have actually been recognized by her, which is an honor, but I also have had the opportunity to spend time with her, not only in Orlando in the World Youth Summit that she had, but also in Panama, in the rainforest, in efforts to bring youth from all Latin America to continue to preserve our environment. And I have a special gift that I carry from her, that it's my bracelet that I have had it since I met her when I was 17 years old. So I carry her message of peace, and I continue to fight for our planet.
So to bring the question a little closer to Oregon, we got an audience question. Oregon legislators may pass legislation to join California in cap and trade. If that happens, it would be the second state in the U.S. That said, ProPublica has investigated the international offset market and is dubious about California's recent decision to include them. Do you think that international offsets can be created to rapidly decarbonize and ensure climate justice for frontline communities?
Well, that's a very long and difficult question. I think, like I mentioned before, and maybe I will sound like a politician to go around the question, but I think we need actually more radical and bold decisions. I think when you start when you start trading one thing for the other, and when the more powerful still have more power, we'll continue to repeat the same cycles. So I will leave it at that. I think we need to just continue to pressure both states to do better, and to continue to press the country and also other nations to do better, and actually to cut back on emissions, and to actually really think how our actions and our lack of action is impacting the world, especially those that are the islands that are experiencing it first, but at the end we're all gonna be impacted. So I hope we continue to pressure our politicians.
So then, if there isn't effectively a U.S. national policy on climate change, I mean, do you think that the state efforts, flawed though they may be, are important in California and Oregon and other places?
I do think, I would say that the most change you can do is at the local level. As someone who did policy, I realized that in order for us to make policies that impact everyone, including local communities, politicians need to understand that how things work and the implementation level. And I think that's where the flaw is that a lot of the politicians are either in denial or don't know what's happening in the actual communities. So I feel that though at the state level we can make some changes, we continue to have to, like I said, make bold decisions that are not just halfway, right? We cannot do what Canada just did. We cannot, because that's hypocrisy at the finest, in its finest form. You cannot say that there's a climate crisis and approve a pipeline. And so I do believe that it's gonna take at every level to pressure. And if you're able to pressure at the state level, then do it. If you're able to pressure at the local level, let's do it, because I think it is the implementation where a lot of people get it wrong. Everything sounds good in paper until it's implemented, and that's where we are seeing the impacts, right, in the implementation. And just to your last question, and cap and trade is one of them.
So then, here's another question from the audience. So what is your honest reaction then when someone says that climate change is a hoax and that we don't need to be doing anything about it?
Well, you know, yesterday was very powerful, sharing my story and also hearing stories of youth that live in islands. I think it was very powerful for them to say, you know, our future is right now fighting for climate change. And it are the poorest communities right now, and places like those islands that are seeing climate change, or I would say climate crisis and it's worse. And I think there's still a chance for us to fight that. And for those that don't believe, I think we just have to keep doing it. We just have to, those that do believe, we just have to keep fighting together to ensure that we do the best for our planet. It's gonna take a revolution to actually fight for the planet. And for those that deny, sooner or later they will be impacted, and that's when they take action. And to put it in a perspective, currently we had a lot of challenge. We actually hosted water strikes with Dolores Huerta in the capital. So the last actually couple of weeks for me have been organizing and taking residents from the Central Valley to the capital to advocate for safe water. And it's so unfortunately that we have to do that. But I think it is actions like that they're gonna make a difference when we are struggling. But part of the issue of us actually loving until the last point for the budget approval is that there were some communities that truly believed that other people did not deserve to have clean water. And you could imagine what communities were. And it's so unfortunate that something as vital as water, that it's a human right in California, talking about laws, has been in violation for 7 years, having 1 million Californians not having access to clean water. So we just have to keep fighting until we get those that are denying that climate change is happening actually join us. But the rest of us that truly believe that climate change is happening, we need to take action. We cannot stay quiet.
Well, and I note at WorldOregon that we've had several people that I know look up to and I've following your Twitter feed, have retweeted, like Bill McKibben, who's spoken for us, and others. And while we try to promote a wide range of discussion, debate on policy, fundamentally we don't want to debate on when there's established facts. And so on established fact like climate change, we seek to have speakers who call out different policy approaches that you might take, but not to deny and debate the fundamental reality that faces us.
Yeah, I think to that point, I think Greta is a great example of explaining, right? We go to school to learn about facts, and when we have all these facts that are saying that the planet is warming and that the Arctic and Greenland are melting and that we're losing animals and they're extinct, going in extinction, how do we continue to believe that the same thing that educates us is the same thing that are holding us back from fighting it? So I do believe that it is going to take people to actually take action to show that, in fact, besides what the evidence says, that it's true what is happening, that we need to do better.
So one question we've got, and we've, it's one that's coming up a lot lately, is, we hear people talk about intersectionality. And for you, as a younger person, as a woman, as an immigrant, a person of color, as an activist, how do you use multiple levels of, your identity to confront issues and bias in society? You talked a little bit about environmental racism, but how does that intersect for you, and how do you talk about it with the communities you work with?
I think one of the things I have learned as a foreigner and trying to make a change in a land that I wasn't born, it's really interesting how coming into a room without knowing who I am, they already made a judgment of how I look like, and then when I open my mouth is of how I sound. And so I have been very aware of that. But having said that, it also gives me a lot of privilege to be able to go from a world of nothing to a world of abundance like I did at Stanford. And so I used that privilege, which for a long time I didn't believe I had, in favor of making changes. I'm able to talk to people that didn't have an education because I know what it means to have parents that didn't have an education. But I also know what it means to be sitting next to politicians and presidents and talk about issues. So it is difficult to still navigate in a place where you are not valued as immigrant or Latina or whatever you want to call me, immigrant, Mexican, Chicana, Latinx, or whatever. Definitely one of the things I learned is that I don't fit one category, even though this country wants to make it that way. And part of that is making sure we take those barriers and we do a mind shift, that we're all in it together, and that when we start breaking those barriers, we can actually find our common ground where we can actually find commonalities. And I think I'm all about that, having conversations where we agree to disagree and that we look for solutions. And that's what an organizer does. You have to find a common ground to bring people together from different places, from different backgrounds, from different classes, together for a solution.
So as a follow-up to that, you talked about some of the challenges or the way other people see you. What kind of advice do you give to other activists about how to combat some of those challenges to do the very tough job of bringing people together?
Well, embrace yourself. I'm never going to lose my accent, and I don't want to, right? Because I may have an accent when I speak, but not when I think. And my accent shows that I'm multilingual, and not just bilingual. And that brings the opportunity for me to break the ice in many places. And what I think I have learned is that the only way to make change is when we are comfortable sharing our vulnerabilities and sharing our story. And sometimes our stories are stories of struggle. And some of us, we continue to struggle, but I think we have found places of thriving. And I think it's actually finding hope, like Jane Goodall says, to continue fighting the hard fights, because the issues that we're fighting are bigger than ourselves. And I think even though I may not see environmental justice in my lifetime, I want to make sure that those that come after do, because we're waiting too long to bring that justice for the whole world when it comes to environmental justice.
So, what is your reaction to with NAFTA and the U.S. Mexico free trade agreement renegotiations and everything? And one of the common points that's thrown out sometimes for those who oppose it is that Mexico's environmental standards are not up to the U.S. standards. What is your reaction to that type of argument when you've just laid out a pretty convincing argument that we have a fair amount of environmental challenges of our own here in the United States? I mean, is that a legitimate argument about Mexico, or is it just part of a larger discussion about environmental degradation overall?
I think it's part of a larger discussion, but I do want to make a comment about that. It's very difficult that we are so good at comparing the country that is not doing better than us, but it's really hard to look inside of us and look at the issues that we're actually not addressing, right? So it's easier to point the fingers to the neighbor, and in this case, Mexico. And I do say that there's a few things that Mexico is not doing right when it comes to environmental protection, but there are a lot of things that Mexico is doing right. And I think we also have to learn, I think, when it comes to regulations, NAFTA created a very, how would I say it in nice words? Created a cycle of exploitation and oppression that benefited a few and it impacted others. In the case of Mexico, it actually brought femicide in the border because women were working in the maquiladoras and then getting killed as they were coming out for cheap labor. So I think there's so many arguments that I could say that NAFTA could be improved better, but I wouldn't blame Mexico for it. I think it was an agreement of 3 countries that I think are very good at either pointing their fingers or saying one thing and doing the other. I think they all could do better. And I think that's part of the challenge, that they have to find common language, not necessarily in English or Spanish, but commonalities in what it means to fight for a better world. And I do have to say Mexico does have some catching up to do, but it's also, I think, a place where there's some learning that we can do too from the U.S.
So circling back to something that you talked a little bit at the beginning of the questions about some leaders who've mentored you, I have an audience question about that you were lucky enough to be mentored by Gloria, who you mentioned in your talk. How do you try to take the lessons you've learned from Gloria or Jane Goodall or Dolores Huerta and others and help to mentor young women leaders in California?
Well, I have a long way to go to be a mentor like them. But you know, one of the things is that when I do speak, I share their wisdom. I share their message. And actually, another woman that I did not mention, and unfortunately she's no longer with us, Dorothy McNeil. And she's not a famous person, but she actually could have done a lot of amazing things because she was walking history. Dorothy came to me after I spoke at the State Lands Commission, and she said, you know, I was going to give up my time to speak because I thought it was not going to make any difference. I'm almost 90 years old. But when I heard you speak, you motivated me to speak. We say that one person for the world, maybe one person, but today you meant the world to me. That woman actually became a very important mentor because she was not only through the civil rights, she actually was alive during the time the women were fighting to have the right to vote. Dorothy taught me lessons by just writing letters once in a while. And I never thought that I could inspire someone at that age where she has seen a lot. But she couldn't see it everything because environmental justice was not happening towards the end of her life. She became a mentor of me. She was a history teacher. She could have written her own history. She was way ahead of her time too. And when she passed away, she basically told me, you know, always continue because you never know how you're going to impact others. So since 17, I've been traveling around the States and also in Mexico and speaking about my story with my community. And for me, that's a way of planting the seeds. But when I do get a young person coming next to me and say, you inspire me, I make sure I continue following up because that's what these women did to me. They not only touched me once, they continue to make a difference. And that difference made all the difference, right? Because they continue thinking that if I continue, I would be able to make change. So now I do speak, a lot of the times I actually speak in schools. And before I used to speak to colleges, but that was too late. And then I thought I would speak to high school. And sometimes I thought it was too late. So now I speak to parents and young children to make sure that we plant the seed sooner so that they could start making a difference sooner when they become conscious about their actions or their lack of inaction. So I try to do mentoring as much as I can, starting with my nieces and nephews. I have 14 of them, so I have a whole school to start with.
So this next question is about social media, and I'd love to hear how you used it both as an activist in past campaigns and then currently. And I say this as someone who was probably one of our most, as a compliment, our most positive, active on social media in helping to promote our talk tonight. And it's really striking how, you know, that can bring in different audiences and different people into the discussion that, you know, wouldn't have heard about you through traditional channels of WorldOregon. So can you talk about how you use that in your activism and your campaigns to bring different groups to the table?
So as I mentioned before, when I started organizing, I didn't have a Facebook and I couldn't create an event and invite my community. And that's part of organizing. You have to know the community that you're working with. With my current, the organization that I work, our mission is to be a catalyst for community-driven water solutions. And when I say community-driven, is that we hear what that community has to say. So when to organizing, the organizing that I've done, it's not using social media because the communities that I work, they don't have internet, they don't own probably a smartphone, they don't have the mediums that I use. However, I use social media to bring awareness of the issue. And when it comes to like funding some of the issues that are impacted, in the case of this talk, I know that the way for us to bring awareness is also to use because I cannot be everywhere in the world. And I also don't want to be everywhere in the world because I know that that impacts and adds to environmental degradation. So I do use social media to get to the places that otherwise I cannot get by presenting. And so I'm continuing to using it. But again, social media only goes so long, because if you are not taking action, it doesn't matter if you share it or like it or love it. If you're just staying in your house and not make a difference, then it actually doesn't have an impact. So for me, when it comes to organizing, I have to do it in action. So I'm all about action. It's what are we doing to make a difference? And so when it comes to social media, is that I'm also sharing it with audiences that otherwise would not be able to be impacted by my grassroots organizing. So it goes both ways, but in terms of the work I'm doing, social media is actually not as effective because I have to do it on the ground. And I have to use what is best modes of communication to that communities, which is still calling people, knocking on doors, and that's all.
And how do you use more traditional media? So, for instance, I know today you were, we arranged for an interview for you with Roxy De La Torre of OPB, both in English and Spanish for a couple different mediums. You know, how do you use those types of more, traditional mainstream media to get the story out?
Yeah, so in terms, I think there's two different things. There's the people that we want to be supporters, and those that want to take action, and those that we want them to find their voices and to advocate for themselves. So the people that I use, like I said, if calling them and knocking on doors are the people that we want them to find their voices and to advocate to make changes. But for the other mediums, we want to make sure that other people are informed to help us be allies, right? Because we can't do it by ourselves. So I use those mediums of Radio Bilingualist in California, which is also to get to the communities that do listen to the radio, right? Because they may not have TV still, or in their cars, right? Where we find supporters that would help us. And as a nonprofit, that also, those mediums also bring awareness to the work in the forms of donations and to continue the work we're doing. Again, we cannot do it alone. So I do see the value of bringing allies, and that's why having you all here today means a lot to me, because having you interested in what I have to say means a lot, because I know if I said something that resonates with you, it will make the difference.
So for our last question, I wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit more about your experience yesterday at the coast with this group that we mentioned, the Tuna Diplomacy kids from Palau, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands. Because, I mean, those are the types of, future leaders that we are fortunate enough to engage with. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and that perspective, especially when you talk about nations that are going to be immediately affected by the negative effects of climate change.
So I wasn't, how would I say it? It's, for me, because I keep myself reading about all the climate crisis, I knew that the islands are the ones the most impacted or are seeing it immediately. But what was so powerful about yesterday is hearing youth speaking and sharing their story. And one of the comments I made to those that did step up and share their story, I said that was the most powerful thing they have, their own stories. And it has been, for me, my experience that sharing my story is what brought support, has brought up mentorship. It has brought up opportunities to be in places I never thought that I would. And so for them to see them so mature, it reminds me of my younger self, and it actually gives me a lot of hope. Because back then when I was fighting, it was just like, I was like an outlier. How is this Mexican young woman who barely could speak English is organizing her community? It was unthink of. I was doing what Greta is doing now 10 years ago, and I was not heard. Is it because I was Mexican or because I didn't speak the mainstream language? We've been fighting for climate change for a long time. And unfortunately, we could have reversed what these youth are experiencing now. And it's so unfortunate that we actually have to see their islands sink. For us to start thinking that we're doing something wrong. And that's when I think about race and how if I had been white, would I have been heard more? I have not stopped talking about this since I was 12 years old. I have spoken to thousands of people every year since I was 16 years old. Why is it that we had to wait for these young people to experience it? And so I agree with Greta. It's so hard to go to school thinking that we may not have a planet. And I truly believed that when I started. I didn't do my organizing for recognition. I didn't know that I was going to end up at Stanford. But I didn't get to Stanford because of my activism. It's because I worked hard and I had good grades. And I also was fighting for my environment. And so for those youth yesterday, it actually meant the world to me to hear that there's young people changing the mindset that I was trying to change when I was their age. And it's so unfortunate that I had to go back to Stanford to get educated and be back to do the same thing I did when I was 12 years old. It is that kind of future that I want where people like them are really fired up like I was when I was their age. I wasn't afraid. But guess what? The difference is that they're doing it because they're already experiencing it. And it's so unfortunate that I couldn't say, your islands will be fine. But the only way they could be fine is if all of you commit to continue spreading the word that these youth, that these islands are being impacted by climate crisis, not even climate change, climate crisis. And until we see it that way, then these youth will also have the support that they need to fight it. So, thank you. Thank you all. And they were really an inspiration to me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming tonight.